So tell me if this sounds familiar to you or not. A new Vanguard related thing happens, whether that be a new episode or a new series is announced, and I get my hopes up looking forward to it because I'm a CardFight Vanguard fan. And then I watch whatever it is that releases and I'm disappointed by it, whether that's by a lot or by a little. And so because of that, my expectations get lowered again, and I watch the next thing that happens with almost no expectations, and well, I end up being impressed and get my hopes high again. To save people who are only just joining in with this series of me doing Vanguard episode reviews, because I've been doing these ever since the beginning of the V-Series reboot, that's basically what this entire series has been. It's been a roller coaster of me getting my hopes up, being disappointed, and then getting impressed because I was disappointed. And the cycle repeats anew. And so, because of that, if you're someone who has realized that by now, it shouldn't be too surprising that I really like this episode. Yeah, I feel like the roller coaster is getting faster as time progresses. Originally, it took a handful of episodes for me to kind of go from one to the other, and the emotions were more extreme. But now, my opinion is changing by the episode. And yeah, this episode's pretty good. Okay, it's not amazing, but it didn't really have to be necessarily. In fact, I would say it only makes the second episode, the previous one, more baffling in retrospect, because this was a really good episode too. So, to expand upon what I said a little bit in the previous episode, I mentioned something about the second episode being generally the most important episode of a TV show. Now, you could argue the first episode is, and I'd agree with you, the first episode is extremely important, but to me, a second episode is more important, because nowadays I usually only ever end up watching TV shows I'm already interested in anyway, so the idea that episode 1 has to be kind of a hook to kind of get you in, it's like, well, I'm already in because I already chose to watch the show. Like with this, for example, with the Vanguard Shin arc, like episode 1 didn't necessarily need to impress me all that much and convince me to watch the series, because I already know I'm going to watch the series. This is how many story arcs of CardFight Vanguard have we had now? I already know I'm going to keep watching. Like, I'm too far in at this point. So episode 1 doesn't really, like the hook that episode 1 of a TV show has doesn't really work on me to the extent that a lot of other people do. But episode 2 is the important one, because episode 2 is the one that proves whether or not episode 1 was a fluke, basically. Because, well, if episode 1 is good or bad, that could just be coincidence. Like, it's not always that episode 1 is kind of demonstrative of the rest of the series. Like, if the first episode's good, it could be good on pure coincidence. That's happened to me before. I've seen a lot of shows with pretty good first episodes, but then the rest of the series just ends up losing my interest, and vice versa. Like, I genuinely think the first episode of the One Piece anime is like one of the worst episodes of the One Piece anime. It's just boring, and it doesn't do a great job of introducing the characters, to the extent that the manga doesn't even begin that way. The manga begins in a completely different way, because the anime shuffled around the order that things happen. The manga actually starts with Luffy's backstory flashback instead, and because of that, the manga has a much stronger start. So because of that, episode 2 has to be important. Episode 2 has to prove that episode 1 wasn't a fluke either way, so it needs to prove consistency, basically. And episode 2 of the Shin arc, because, you know, we're talking about the Shin arc here still, episode 2 of the Shin arc is a weird one, because it's the opposite of episode 3. See, episode 3 reaffirms the things I liked about episode 1, whereas episode 2 reaffirms the things I didn't like. So if you remember from my previous Shin episode video, I talked about how, well, yeah, it reaffirmed the things I didn't like about the Shin arc. It focused really heavily on setting the tone with these really bad jokes, whereas this episode had almost no jokes, and the jokes that were there were pretty good, and they were self-contained for the most part to a B plot. This episode smartly had an A plot and a B plot. The A plot was about Tachibana protecting the card shop, and the B plot was about Shin having to retake his exams. And most of the jokes were in the Shin B plot. There were just jokes to do with, Shin passing an exam, and that's it. And it was just little clips of him doing the exam every once in a while. And that's good. It's harmless. And the jokes were funnier too. They were more restraint. Like the idea that he's just, like, he doesn't care about the exam, so he's just, like, rolling the pencil to get a random answer, and then the fact that he barely passes, and then the fact that he uses, like, sign language to communicate to Mark. That was alright, those jokes were pretty decent, and they were decently timed, too. They came in at the right time. They didn't override the plot line like in the previous episode, where the previous episode kept setting up plot beats and then would completely undermine them with a joke. Whereas this time, they would have the important plot line, then they'd splice in a joke, and then we'd come back to the plot line, which is a much better way of doing it. And again, the jokes were more restrained. There wasn't really any ecchi. There was like a joke at the beginning with like Shin blushing about running into Asuka, but that was it. Other than that, like the ecchi stuff wasn't really there, which is good, in my opinion. So the actual plot, it still wasn't amazing. Basically, Tachibana has to look after the store because Shin has to retake an exam. That's basically the plot. Asuka sends out Fujinomi and Gonami to kidnap Mikuru, which is a bit random. Maybe we'll find out in a future episode why she went after Mikuru specifically. Surely you'd want Shin, like, right? Surely, kidnap Shin himself and then keep him kidnapped until he gives you the shop. It's shown that she's confident that she can kidnap people, and Mikuru isn't exactly like weaker physically than someone like Tachibana, so surely maybe Tachibana. But then again, maybe Mikuru would be the best one to go for since she's related to Rive, and that way Rive gets annoyed, whereas Rive doesn't really care about Tachibana, so I don't know. I hope that next episode we get a little bit more explanation into that, because it did seem a little bit random to me. Because the way it's presented is Asuka gets up an image of Mikuru and then tells those two, like, you know what to do. Like, do they know what to do? It also kind of, like, I get that this is a sillier story arc. The second episode did a very good job of cementing that this is a very silly, not to be taken all too seriously story arc. But the fact that they just go straight to kidnapping is a bit weird to me, because, Vanguard has usually been fairly grounded in its more slice of life sort of elements and stuff. And they went out of their way to kind of establish that Asuka and her forces are just normal people playing Vanguard. They're not like a over-the-top, cartoonishly evil villain who have supernatural powers or anything. So the fact that these normal people just go, yep, we're going to kidnap you, is a bit weird. It feels like the tone is a little bit all over the place, because, again, it just rubs me the wrong way that they just go immediately towards kidnapping. I don't really get it. The moment where they go up to the card shop and they just grab Mikuru and they just start taking her is just so weird and surreal to me, because this is like something that would happen in like Bleach, where the enemies are like these supernatural forces that are like, yes, we're going to kidnap this character and you have to come to us to take him. It's very like shonen-y, but this arc has gone out of its way to set up that it's a slice of life comedy, so it just doesn't really gel well with me that they just straight up take her. And then Tachibana does, the card game anime thing where he's like, you gotta card fight me first before you can take her. And they accept. And I don't fully get that, because they were already successfully in the process of kidnapping her. It was obvious that Tachibana didn't really pose a threat. They could just push him over and there wasn't really much he could do about it. Hell, they probably could have took him with them if they really wanted to. Like, he didn't really seem like much of a threat at all, but he's like, hey, card fight me. And they're like, okay, sure, what do we get if we card fight you? And he's like, if you win, you get to take her. And it's like, well, we were going to take her anyway, so what's the point? But they card fight him anyway. So, okay. See, I kind of would have preferred, I guess, if Tachibana would have won the card fight, and then they just took her anyway. That would have been like a fun subversion, because this series seems to be very like subversive with the tropes and stuff by like undercutting things with jokes. And I think that would have been actually a fun, clever way of doing that. Like, it would have really set these villains up as like ruthless. It wouldn't have made sense because, of course, they actually go out of their way to explain that Fujinomi and Gonomi are actually the most powerful card fighters. Yes, I can't believe it, but the villain of the story arc does genuinely just send out the most powerful card fighters they have access to. That never happens in anime. They always send out like the weaker villains first, and then have the main characters of the arc kind of work through the weaker villains to kind of work their way up to the more powerful ones in like a power scaling way. But no, we just start with the most powerful ones, and that's kind of refreshing. I'm not sure how we're going to handle that with the power scaling stuff later on, but that's neat. I like that. And yeah, Tachibana loses. And the card fight was good. You know, it was good. They actually showed a decent amount of it. Tachibana used Angel Feathers, and it addressed something that me and I imagine a lot of other fans have been thinking about for a while, in that, well, the way Vanguard works, especially in the anime, is you imagine yourself as the unit. And so to visualize this in the anime, they'll show like the anime character's like head on the unit's body as like a representation of them imagining themselves as the unit. And well, Tachibana's a dude, and he imagines himself as Angel Feather units, which are these female characters with dresses and stuff. And they just do it. They just straight up do it. They're like, yep, we're gonna have a dude's head on a girl's body, and we're not even gonna poke any fun or jokes or anything at it. They just played it completely straight. And I'm like, is this the same anime from one episode ago? Because the anime from one episode ago would have rang the barrel for that. Like, they would have made as many deprecating jokes about that as possible. So the fact that they didn't make any jokes at all, how they didn't even acknowledge it, was neat. And this is, like, how many episodes for Vanguard are we now? Like, over 400 at least. We're over 400 episodes for the anime, and this is the first time this has ever happened. Yes, really. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time we've actually seen a male character's head on a female unit like that, at least. And yeah, it's not mentioned, and I'm like, whoa, that's impressive, because yes, male characters, male people do use female-centered decks, and up until this point, we've kind of had that like unspoken rule that male characters don't use female-centered decks like that. Like, even when someone like Miguel starts using Neo Nectar and G Next, he uses a specific type of Neo Nectar cards that heavily focus around male characters, like, just to get around that. So the fact that we went that extra mile here is good. We should have done it earlier. Like, that's something that should have happened in, like, what, the first story arc of the original Vanguard, but its inclusion here is neat, and I really liked it. And again, the card fight was good. Could have done without Fujinomi constantly talking about how hungry he is, but I also understand that was, like, the gimmick of the card fight. The idea that, like, his strategy revolves around, like, winning as fast as possible, so that he can eat, I guess, because he's hungry. But I like that they kind of used his stomach rumbling and him complaining about how hungry he was as kind of like a countdown timer. Like, he was progressively getting more and more hungry, and you could tell that once he got a certain amount hungry, he was going to release like an all-out attack that would just decimate Tachibana. And that did happen. They could have had a cooler way of executing that. It was a little bit annoying the way they did execute it, but it's not a bad idea. And I'm interested to see how they do it again, because if they do it a second time, which, you know, they're going to have a rematch at some point, right? That goes without saying. And when they do eventually have their rematch, I hope that's executed a little bit better, and they go like a different way with it. But it's a cool idea nonetheless. And yeah, the card fight was good. I liked it. No complaints with the card fight, actually. And yeah, that's episode 3. I'm surprisingly like impressed with it. Again, nothing amazingly groundbreaking. You know, this isn't exactly a Vanguard episode that'll be remembered for years to come. It's not one of my favorites, but in terms of making me a little bit more open-minded for the story arc, it did a pretty good job there. I am interested to see where things go now. Like, the way we ended this episode was, well, Mikuru's gone, and we need to win her back, I guess, which... Come on, anime, really? We're still doing the the girl is just the damsel in distress thing. I mean, I don't hate it when it's used sparingly. It just seems very random in this particular sense because Mikuru, I don't know, like Mikuru I never really saw her as like a weak character that would just get taken like that. You know, again, I would have thought it would have been Tachibana. In fact, that would have made his loss hit harder. The fact that he has to pay the consequences for his own loss. And it did kind of hit me as a little weird that like when Mark enters the card shop, Tachibana is just like sitting there almost unconscious as if he was in a real fight. And I'm like, it was a card game. I thought the whole point of CardFight Vanguard was that it was supposed to be fairly grounded and slice and lifey they acknowledged that it was just a card game. Once again, this story arc has had, as far as I'm aware, absolutely no supernatural or fantasy things in it so far. So the fact that losing a card fight ends in the character being almost unconscious, either that or Tachibana's just being like wildly over dramatic, which is the option I choose to believe. Because when the other story arcs did stuff like that, they had an in-universe explanation as to why. Like, oh, using my psyqualia drains my body's energy, and that's why I almost faint, you know? But like here, it's just random to add drama to the scene, I guess. But we know that he's going to be fine again in the next episode. Like, him just being depressed that he lost is fine. And again, in that regard too, Fujinomi and Gonami just accepting the card fight, they should have had a throwaway line or whatever about, like, when they win and take Mikuru, they could have had a throwaway line like, oh, we were going to take her either way, we just accepted your request because, well, we're card fighters and we like card fighting, so obviously we're going to accept the request. The outcome had nothing to do with whether or not we were going to take Mikuru or not, though. Or they could have just had a line about how they have a lot of pride and they really care about holding themselves to that higher standard, which again would contradict with the previous episode where Gonami got blindsided by the cat, but oh well. Just something, you know, again, nitpicks. You know, like I'm always going to have problems with a Vanguard episode no matter what. Like that just is kind of par for the course because nothing's flawless. There's problems with everything. But the fact that, you know, my problems are more or less just nitpicks. The overall episode was really enjoyable. That's a good sign. And I'm looking forward to seeing more. So I will see you later with episode 4 of CardFight Vanguard Shinemon Arc.